Have you ever wondered what happens the moment a species realizes they've been protecting the wrong assumption for years? That's the question I couldn't shake while putting this one together. Because somewhere in every one of these stories, there's a person standing quietly in the corner of the room who everyone assumes is the weakest one there, and nobody ever stops to ask what happens if they're wrong. Today, we find out. The Aurelian spire hung in orbit above a dead moon, its outer hull glowing faint gold from the reflected light of a binary star system that never truly went dark. It was neutral ground, a station built by no single empire and owned by none, existing solely so that species who hated each other could sit in the same room without drawing weapons. That was the theory. Anyway, Ambassador Nearest Thal did not believe in theories. She believed in probabilities, in contingencies, in the quiet arithmetic of survival that her people had practiced for 11,000 years. The Solinari were not a young species. They were old enough to have outgrown war the way a person outgrows a childhood fear. Not because the fear disappeared, but because they built enough walls between themselves and it that they forgot what it felt like. She stood at the curved viewport of her private chamber, watching the light bend and scatter across her own translucent skin. Solinari bodies did not have blood in the way most galactic species understood it. They ran on bioluminescent plasma, threads of pale blue light visible just beneath the surface, pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. It was beautiful. It was also, in the wrong conditions, catastrophically fragile. A hard vacuum could unravel a Solinari in under 4 minutes. A sudden temperature drop could do it faster. They were a species built for elegance, not endurance, and Neris had made peace with that trait a long time ago. Tonight, elegance was the only weapon she had. She was here to close the Halvan Accord, a treaty that would end nearly 6 years of tension over a resource-rich asteroid belt known as the Kesh Expanse. The Expanse sat between Solinari territory and the reach of the Vornax Compact, a coalition of trade cartels and mercenary fleets who had spent the last decade turning negotiation into a word that meant something closer to extortion. If the treaty held, 3 border systems would stop bleeding people. If it didn't, Neris already knew whose funeral would come first. Hers. There was a knock at the door, quiet and even, exactly 2 seconds apart. She didn't need to check who it was. "Come in, Daniel." The door slid open and the bodyguard stepped inside, dressed in a plain charcoal jacket that had none of the ceremonial trim her own guards wore. Daniel Reyes was not a large man by any galactic standard. He stood shorter than her Solinari escort, narrower through the shoulders than the station's own security officers, and he had a face that gave away nothing at all. Calm, almost bored-looking, the kind of face you'd forget within an hour of meeting him. That was, Neris had come to understand, entirely the point. "Perimeter's clear," he said. "I walked the east corridor twice. Vornax delegations already docked, ahead of schedule." "Ahead of schedule," she repeated, turning from the window. "That's unlike them." "It's the first thing they've done tonight that worries me," Daniel said. She studied him for a moment. Humans were the newest confirmed species in the Galactic Registry. Barely a decade past their first contact, and the official files on them read like a species report written by someone who'd only seen the cover of the book. Temperate world, moderate technology, short lifespans, soft anatomy, no notable combat classification. The Galactic Council had filed Earth somewhere between harmless and irrelevant, and Vanguard Secure Solutions, the private contractor Neris used for close protection, had offered her a human specialist at a price so low it almost felt insulting to accept. She'd taken it anyway, mostly as a gesture. A small kindness toward a new species trying to find its footing among older ones. She told herself that, at least in the beginning. 6 months later, she still wasn't sure what to think of him. "You don't have to keep walking corridors at this hour," she said, softer than she meant to. "You've been on your feet since before the last docking cycle." "I sleep in shifts," Daniel said. "Comes with the job." "Comes with the job? Or comes with you?" Something flickered behind his eyes, gone before she could name it. "Bit of both, Ambassador." There was a pause that lasted a beat too long. Neris found herself doing that more often lately, letting silences stretch a half-second past comfortable, just to see what filled them. She told herself it was curiosity about an unfamiliar species. She was old enough to know better than to fully believe her own excuses. "The summit begins in an hour," she said, turning back toward the window before he could see whatever her light patterns were doing under her skin, a tell she couldn't fully suppress even after a century of diplomatic training. "I need you steady tonight, Daniel, not just alert." "Steady? I'm always steady." "You say that like it isn't strange," she murmured. "Do you know what my own guards call you, behind your back?" He almost smiled. "Almost, I can guess. They call you the shadow that forgot how to be afraid." She turned to face him fully now. "They mean it as an insult. I'm no longer sure it is one." For a long moment neither of them said anything, and the station hummed quietly around them. Some distant engine cycling coolant through the walls, the low murmur of 100 species preparing for a night that would decide whether a war started or ended. Daniel held her gaze a second longer than protocol required, then looked away first, the way he always did, like a man deliberately refusing to let something happen. "We should move," he said. "I don't like being predictable with our timing." "No," Nereus agreed. "Neither do I." The grand concourse of the Aurelian Spire had been designed to impress, and it did. A vaulted ceiling of transparent alloy stretched 300 meters overhead, framing the binary stars outside like a painting no artist could ever fully replicate. Delegations from 11 species mingled beneath it, an ocean of translators, aides, and armed escorts arranged with the careful choreography of people who all secretly expected the night to go wrong. Vornak's compact representatives arrived precisely as the doors opened, a small detail that Daniel noted and filed away without comment. There were 4 of them, led by a broker named Ashir Kell, a name that meant nothing on any human tongue but carried real weight across 3 border systems. Kell's species, the Threxel, were long-limbed and covered in overlapping chitin plates that shifted color with mood, currently locked in a flat, unreadable gray. Kell approached Nereus with the kind of smile that had probably closed 1,000 deals and ended just as many lives. "Ambassador Thal," he said, his translated voice carrying a faint metallic buzz beneath it. "You look radiant tonight. Fitting, given what we're here to discuss." "Broker Kell," Nereus replied, inclining her head with practiced neutrality. "I trust your journey was uneventful." Uneventful is a relative term. His eyes, black and multifaceted, slid past her shoulder toward Daniel, lingering there a fraction too long. "And this is your new security. Vanguard, isn't it? I confess I'm surprised the Solinari Accord would entrust a life as valuable as yours to a species that hasn't even finished exploring its own solar system." "Specialist Reyes has served my detail without incident," Nereus said evenly. "I'm sure he has." Kell's gaze didn't move. "Tell me, human, do you find it difficult, standing so close to something you could never protect if things turned violent?" Daniel's expression didn't so much as twitch. "Haven't had to find out yet." "No," Kell agreed, something faintly amused sliding into his tone. "I suppose you haven't." He turned back to Nereus with the smoothness of someone closing one conversation and opening another entirely. "Shall we begin? I understand there's quite a lot riding on tonight's proceedings. For all of us." As the delegations moved toward the summit chamber, Daniel fell into position 2 steps behind Nereus, close enough to react, far enough to stay out of the formal photographs the station's press drones were quietly capturing. He scanned the room out of habit more than suspicion, cataloging exits, counting armed escorts, noting who stood where and who didn't. It was the third thing that caught his attention, not the guards, not the exits, but the ventilation grates lining the upper wall of the concourse, spaced at intervals slightly different from the station's official schematics he'd memorized during his security briefing 3 days earlier. He didn't say anything yet, not without more than a hunch, but he filed it away, the same quiet part of his mind that had kept him alive through things he never discussed with anyone, including the woman he was sworn to protect. The summit chamber was smaller than the concourse, built for negotiation rather than spectacle, a circular room with a long obsidian table at its center and a dome of reinforced viewport overhead. Nereus took her seat across from Ashir Kell, flanked by 2 of her own Solinari guards, their ceremonial pikes resting against their shoulders in a posture that was more tradition than function. Daniel stood near the door, hands loosely clasped, watching. The negotiations opened well enough. Territorial lines were proposed. Mining rights across 3 sectors of the Kesh expanse were laid out in careful, incremental concessions, the kind of slow diplomatic dance that could take hours to complete a single sentence of actual agreement. Nereus held her ground with the same composure that had carried her through 4 decades of galactic politics, and for a while, it almost felt like the treaty might hold. Then Kel's tone shifted, subtle at first, the kind of thing only someone who'd spent years reading alien body language would notice. "Before we finalize the border clauses," Kel said, folding his long fingers together on the table, "I'd like to raise a concern regarding station security. Given recent instability along several trade routes, my delegation would feel more comfortable if the Aurelian Spire's environmental controls were placed under joint oversight for the duration of these talks." Neris felt something cold settle low in her chest, an instinct she'd learned never to ignore. "That's an unusual request, Broker Kel. These are unusual times," he said pleasantly. Daniel's eyes moved, almost imperceptibly, toward the ventilation grate nearest the ceiling. The one spaced wrong. He stepped forward, close enough to speak low near Neris's ear without drawing the room's attention. "Ambassador, we need to end this session." Now Neris didn't turn her head, but her voice dropped to match his. "Explain. I don't have proof yet," Daniel murmured. "Just a feeling I've learned not to argue with." Across the table, Kel's expression hadn't changed, still that same flat, patient gray, but something in his posture had gone very slightly still, the way a predator goes still right before it stops pretending to be patient at all. "Is there a problem, Specialist Reyes?" Kel asked, his voice carrying just enough volume to reach the rest of the room. Daniel met his eyes without hesitation. "Not yet." The lights along the chamber's ceiling flickered once, a small stutter that most of the room dismissed as nothing more than a power fluctuation. Daniel didn't dismiss it. He was already moving toward Neris when the ventilation system hissed to life above them, and every Solinari guard in the room went rigid at the exact same moment, their bioluminescent skin flaring an alarmed, violent white. I want to pause here for a second, because this is usually the point in these videos where people either lean in or check the time remaining. If you're still here, you already know something's about to break loose. What you don't know yet is how far this one's going to go before it's over. The gas came down in a thin, almost invisible haze, pale enough that half the room mistook it for condensation from the environmental system. Neris knew better within the first breath. It hit the back of her throat like static. A wrongness she felt in the threads of light beneath her own skin before her mind had even caught up to what was happening. Around her, the Solinari guards convulsed. Their bioluminescent plasma, the same soft blue glow that ran beneath every Solinari's skin, surged violently bright, then began to flicker, unstable, like a current shorting out. One guard dropped his ceremonial pike and folded to the floor, his glow stuttering in erratic, panicked pulses before dimming to almost nothing. The other staggered against the obsidian table, clutching at his own chest as though he could physically hold his light together with his hands. Neris felt her legs buckle beneath her. Her vision fractured at the edges, the room splitting into overlapping afterimages, a symptom she recognized immediately and with growing horror. Photonic destabilization. Someone had engineered a compound that unraveled the very thing that kept a Solinari alive, and they had done it in a room full of people who trusted the air around them. Neris. Daniel's voice cut through the haze, closer than it should have been. She hadn't seen him move. One moment he'd been standing near the door, and the next his arm was around her shoulders, holding her upright against a body that felt, absurdly, warm and completely steady, like the gas simply didn't exist for him. "You're not," she managed. Her words slurring at the edges, affected. "No," he said, and something in his voice had changed, flattened out into a register she'd never heard from him before. Calm in a way that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with certainty. Across the table, Ashir Kel rose from his seat without hurry, watching the chaos unfold with the detached interest of a man reviewing a report he'd already read twice. His guards, 4 Threxel enforcers who had been standing motionless near the chamber's far wall, pulled thin breathing membranes down over their mandibles, unaffected by design. "Ambassador Thal," Kel said, stepping around the table with slow, deliberate steps. "I truly am sorry it's come to this. Believe me when I say the Compact would have preferred a peaceful resolution. Unfortunately, peaceful resolutions don't secure mining rights the way a sudden, tragic station malfunction does." Neris tried to speak and produced only a strangled breath, her chest tightening as her own plasma threads dimmed further, the light beneath her skin flickering like a candle in wind. "You'll forgive the theatrics," Kel continued. "Almost pleasant. In a few minutes, this will read as an unfortunate contamination in the recycled air system. Tragic, but explainable. The Halvan Accord dies with you tonight, Ambassador, and the Kesh Expanse becomes considerably easier to acquire once there's no one left to argue the border. Daniel lowered Neris gently to the floor, propping her against the base of the table, and stood back up slowly, rolling his shoulders once like a man settling into a stance he hadn't needed in a while. "You built that gas for Solinari biology," Daniel said. "It wasn't a question. And Threxil, and roughly 9 other species on our registry," Kel replied, unbothered. "It's a versatile little compound, very precise about who it kills." His black eyes flicked over Daniel with something between curiosity and mild disappointment. "Humans, unfortunately, weren't part of our testing data. Small oversight. I don't imagine it'll matter much longer." He gestured almost lazily, and the 4 Threxil enforcers moved. "Here's the thing about the file the Galactic Council kept on Earth. It described a temperate world, moderate biosphere, no notable threats. What it failed to mention, because nobody had bothered to look closely enough, was that humanity's homeworld had spent the better part of 2 centuries clawing its way back from a global pandemic that had, at its worst, killed nearly a third of the species. The survivors who rebuilt civilization afterward hadn't done it with soft immune systems. They'd done it because something in human biology had been forced, brutally and without mercy, to get very good at surviving things that were supposed to kill it. Daniel Reyes had grown up in the generations after that recovery, in a world that still ran background screenings for engineered pathogens as casually as other planets checked the weather. A gas built to unravel Solinari plasma and shut down Threxil respiration meant nothing to lungs that had been shaped by something far crueler. The first enforcer reached him with a serrated blade already drawn, swinging in a wide arc meant to open his throat. Daniel didn't step back. He stepped in, closing the distance faster than the Threxil's mind could adjust for, catching the enforcer's wrist and redirecting the blade's momentum past his own shoulder while driving his other palm hard into the joint between chitin plates at the enforcer's elbow. Something cracked, sharp and final. The enforcer screamed, a high clicking sound, and dropped the blade. Daniel caught it before it hit the ground and used the enforcer's own momentum to throw him into the second attacker, buying himself half a second he didn't waste. Neris, slumped against the table's edge, fought to keep her eyes open, watching through a haze of failing light as the man she had spent 6 months quietly, carefully not thinking about in any way that mattered, moved through the chamber like something that had simply been waiting for a reason. The third enforcer came at him low, aiming for his legs. Daniel sidestepped, brought an elbow down hard between the Threxil's shoulder plates, and used the momentum of the strike to spin into the 4th attacker before that one had even fully raised his weapon. The blade Daniel had taken opened a long gash across the enforcer's forearm, not deep enough to kill, deep enough to make him drop his weapon and stumble back into the wall, clutching at the wound with a wet, panicked hiss. 4 Threxil enforcers, trained mercenaries armed and briefed for exactly this moment, and in under 20 seconds, none of them were standing. Ashir Kel had stopped smiling. "That's..." Kel started, then seemed to genuinely search for the right word, something Neris had never once seen him do in 4 decades of watching brokers like him talk. "That's not in any file I've read. Files get things wrong," Daniel said, and there was something almost tired in his voice now. The exhaustion of a man who'd had this exact conversation with the galaxy more than once already. "Earth's not a garden world, broker. It's a quarantine world. We didn't get soft. We got mean." Kel's chitin plates shifted rapidly through a spectrum of colors, gray sliding into a mottled, uncertain amber, an emotional tell his species had never quite learned to hide. He reached for something at his belt, a small device, but Daniel closed the distance before Kel's fingers found it, catching his wrist in a grip that made the broker's amber plating flare bright with pain. "You're going to shut off whatever's still pumping through that vent," Daniel said quietly. "Right now." "You can't," Kel gasped. "You can't possibly think this changes anything. The compact has fleets positioned along 3 border systems. This station. This treaty. It was always going to fall one way or another." Daniel's grip tightened until something in Kel's wrist gave with a brittle snap, and the broker's protest dissolved into a shrill, wordless sound of pain. Neris, her vision narrowing at the edges, her chest burning with the effort of holding her own light together, watched Daniel drag Kel toward the wall panel controlling the ventilation system, forcing the broker's uninjured hand against the release mechanism. The hiss of gas overhead cut off. The vents shuddered once and reversed, the station's emergency purge system flooding the chamber with clean atmosphere. It wasn't fast enough for everyone. Both Solinari guards lay motionless on the floor, their once vivid glow reduced to a faint, dying flicker. Neris felt her own light stabilizing slowly, painfully, her breath returning in shallow, grateful pulls, but the room around her was already a wreckage of unconscious bodies and shattered chairs, evidence of exactly how close the night had come to ending very differently. Daniel released Kel, letting the broker crumple against the wall clutching his ruined wrist, and crossed the chamber in 3 quick strides to kneel beside Neris, his hands finding her shoulders with a gentleness that felt strange coming from someone who'd just broken 4 armed mercenaries in under a minute. "Hey," he said, low, steady, the exhaustion in his voice replaced now by something quieter, something that sounded almost afraid, in a way Neris had never once heard from him in 6 months of calm. "Stay with me. Look at me." She managed to focus on his face, her plasma threads settling into a slow, uneven pulse beneath her skin, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, the wreckage of the chamber and the groaning bodies around them fading into something distant and unimportant. "You're not what the files say you are," she whispered. "No," Daniel agreed quietly. "None of us are." Her fingers found the front of his jacket, gripping weakly, and for one strange, suspended second, it felt like the room held its breath along with her. That second didn't last. The chamber's overhead comm crackled to life, and the station's automated voice cut through the wreckage in a flat, mechanical tone that made every remaining conscious person in the room go still. "Warning, unauthorized vessel formation detected at the station's outer perimeter. Multiple signatures decloaking. All personnel, proceed immediately to designated shelter zones." Daniel's head lifted sharply toward the viewport overhead, where the soft binary starlight outside had just begun to darken, swallowed by the jagged, unmistakable silhouettes of Vornak's warships sliding into position around the Aurelian spire. Ashir Kel, still slumped against the wall with his wrist cradled against his chest, let out a short, broken laugh. "You didn't think," he rasped, "that I came here without insurance, did you?" The Vornak's fleet outside the viewport didn't look like a negotiating position. It looked like a decision that had already been made, one that only needed the right excuse to become official. Daniel got nearest to her feet, one arm braced under her shoulders, feeling how light she was, how the glow beneath her skin still hadn't fully steadied. Around them, station alarms wailed in overlapping tones, a dozen different species emergency signals all trying to say the same thing at once. "Get out, get down, get somewhere that isn't here." "Can you stand?" he asked. "I can stand," Neris said, though her voice wavered on the second word. "Whether I can run is a separate question." "Then we walk fast." He glanced toward Ashir Kel, still slumped against the wall clutching his broken wrist, and something in his expression went cold in a way Neris hadn't seen from him before. "Your fleet. Talk now." Kel managed something close to a smile through the pain. "You broke my wrist, human. I don't owe you conversation." "You don't," Daniel agreed. "But you'll want to be somewhere else when this station's defense grid figures out what your ships are doing out there, and right now I'm the only one deciding where you get to stand." Kel's amber plating flickered, uncertain, and for the first time all night he answered honestly. "The fleet isn't here for negotiation. It's here to make sure the ambassador doesn't leave this station alive. Treaty or no treaty. If the gas failed, this was always the fallback." Neris felt something in her chest tighten that had nothing to do with her damaged plasma. "You were never planning to let the Accord succeed. The Accord was never the point," Kel said quietly. "The Kesh Expanse was. A dead ambassador and a burning station make for a very convincing argument that Solinari territory can't be defended. Compact ships move in within the week. Nobody official has to admit to anything." Daniel didn't waste time responding. He tapped the comm unit at his collar, the same understated device Neris had noticed him wearing since the day they'd met and never once asked about. Assuming it was standard contractor equipment, it wasn't. "Vanguard Actual, this is Reyes," he said, his voice dropping into the same flat, professional register he'd used the moment the gas hit the room. "Priority signal, Kesh Sector, Aurelian Spire. Principal is compromised. Hostile fleet inbound, requesting immediate overwatch. For a moment, static answered him, and Neris felt her hope flicker along with the last unstable pulses of her own light. Then a voice cut through, calm, unhurried, carrying an accent Neris had never heard from any human she'd met before. Something warm and clipped at the edges. "Copy that, Reyes. We've had eyes on that fleet since it left dock. Hold position, we're already moving." Kel's chitin plating went pale, the amber draining out of it fast. "You had a fleet shadowing us this entire time? You showed up early," Daniel said. "I told the ambassador that worried me. Turns out I wasn't the only one who noticed." Outside the viewport, the darkness around the Vornax warships tore open without warning. The same violent, silent rupture of space that meant something was punching through the barrier between dimensions rather than politely decloaking through it. Neris had read about human ship drives and passing briefings, and dismissed them as unremarkable, another unglamorous footnote in a young species' technological file. She understood now how badly that file had underestimated everything about the species it was describing. 3 vessels emerged from the tear, blunt and heavy, built with none of the elegant curves the rest of the galaxy favored. They looked less like starships, and more like something forged rather than designed. Thick plating layered over thick plating. The kind of ugly, brutal architecture that only made sense if you assumed the people who built it expected to be hit, often, and simply didn't intend to lose because of it. The lead ship dwarfed the entire Vornax formation. "That's not possible," Kel whispered. "Human fleets don't operate this deep into neutral territory. There are treaties, Daniel agreed, about where we're allowed to be seen. Nobody ever said we couldn't watch." A voice crackled over the spire's open comm, gravel rough, entirely unbothered by the sight of an entire hostile fleet suddenly finding itself outmatched. "This is Fleet Commander Elena Vasquez, Earth Defense Auxiliary, to the Vornax vessels currently threatening a neutral diplomatic station. You have 30 seconds to power down weapons and withdraw. After that, I stop asking." The Vornax fleet didn't wait the full 30 seconds. Their formation broke almost immediately. Engines flaring as ships peeled away from the station, more interested in surviving the night than proving a point that had already stopped mattering the moment 3 human warships tore a hole in local space to make it. Not every ship ran fast enough. One Vornax cruiser, either slower to react or simply too committed to the plan to abandon it, fired a single volley toward the spire's outer hull, a last desperate act of spite rather than strategy. Commander Vasquez's lead vessel didn't bother with a full barrage in response. A single railgun round, fired without ceremony, tore straight through the cruiser's midsection, and the ship folded in on itself in eerie silence before the vacuum finished the job the impact started. The rest of the fleet didn't need a second demonstration. Within a minute, the space around the Aurelian spire was empty of anything but drifting debris and the 3 patient, unhurried shapes of Earth's ships holding position. Inside the summit chamber, the emergency lighting steadied, and the wailing alarms finally cut off, leaving behind a silence that felt almost strange after everything that had just happened. Neris let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, feeling the last of the instability in her own light finally settle into something closer to normal. She looked up at Daniel, who was still holding her steady, his expression somewhere between relief and the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent the last 10 minutes fully expecting to die, and hadn't let it slow him down once. "You knew," she said quietly, "about the fleet. Before tonight." "I suspected," Daniel said. "Vanguard doesn't send contractors into rooms like this without a fallback plan. I just didn't expect to need it this fast. You could have told me. Would it have changed how you walked into that room?" Neris considered that, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that it wouldn't have. "No, I suppose it wouldn't." "Then it wasn't information you needed," Daniel said simply. "It was information that would have made you carry weight that wasn't yours to carry yet." She studied him for a long moment, the 2 unconscious guards still being tended by station medical drones nearby, Ashir Kel being led away in restraints by Spire security, the entire chamber slowly reassembling itself into something that resembled order again. And in the middle of all of it, the man who'd spent 6 months standing quietly in corners, dismissed by nearly everyone in the room as the least significant person in it, was the only reason any of them were still breathing. "They're going to write reports about tonight," Neris said. Every species on this station is going to send word home about what happened in this room, about what you are. Probably, Daniel agreed. Does that concern you? He considered the question honestly, the way he seemed to consider most things. A little. We spent a long time trying to convince the galaxy we weren't a threat to anyone. Tonight kind of undoes that. Maybe, Nearest said quietly, the galaxy needed to understand the difference between a threat and a shield. You were never the first. You were only ever the second until someone forced your hand. Something in his expression shifted at that. Something quieter than relief. Something Nearest didn't have a full word for even in her own language. That's a generous read on tonight, Ambassador. I've had a difficult night, she said, a ghost of something almost like a smile crossing her features for the first time since the gas had hit the room. I'm allowed a little generosity. Daniel helped her fully to her feet, his hand lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary at her back, and neither of them commented on it, though Nearest found she didn't particularly want to. For what it's worth, Daniel said, the accord still stands. Kel's arrest doesn't kill the treaty. If anything, it proves exactly why the Kesh border needs it more than ever. Then I suppose, Nearest said softly, we still have work to do. We do. Together, this time. No more standing quietly in corners while I pretend not to notice you. Daniel's mouth curved, the closest thing to a real smile she'd seen from him in 6 months. I'll work on that, Ambassador Nearest, she said. I think after tonight, you've earned that much. Nearest, he repeated, testing the shape of it, and something in the way he said her name made the light beneath her skin pulse warm and steady in a way that had nothing to do with the toxin finally clearing her system. Outside the viewport, the 3 human warships held their quiet, patient formation, framed against the same binary starlight that had watched over the Aurelian Spire since long before any of the species aboard it had learned to sit across a table from each other without expecting betrayal. For the first time and longer than Nearest could remember, the light didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a beginning. I don't know about you, but I've thought about this kind of story more than I probably should. The idea that the person everyone underestimates, the one standing quietly in the corner while the room decides who matters, might be the only reason any of them make it to morning. There's something about that I can't quite shake, and I don't think I'm supposed to. If this one hit for you, do me a favor and hit like. Drop a comment telling me which alien species you want humanity to run into next, and share this with someone who needs a good sci-fi story in their feed today. And if you want more of these, come find us over on sci-fi Soundscape, because we've got a lot more where this came from.